Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about what is easily the worst faction in the entire game. Out of the major factions, of course, because major factions are generally going to be better than minor factions. And of course, this is also in comparison to other factions that are playable. This is kind of the point I think people need to understand. I'm not just talking about like a faction in isolation. I'm always with every single one of these videos talking about factions compared to other factions. Critical point, because some people is like, oh, how is this faction bad? Well, they're not bad, quote unquote, in isolation. They're bad compared to what other factions exist out there. Though certainly with Seti, I do really have to wonder what the heck were the developers thinking about this particular faction, because there's some really questionable decisions over here with this one. See, the way Seti is supposed to work, and one of the principal benefits over here, and certainly one that I've used to great success over here to conquer a good amount of territory, become Pharaoh, and be in such a dominant position that, yeah, no one's even gonna come close to challenge me in this situation. So I have avoided the civil war in Egypt. But here's the thing. You are supposed to be this faction that relies very heavily on getting a lot of troops and also getting great post-battle rewards, because 50% rewards from battles is actually a very significant benefit, because you're talking about food, you're talking about gold, you're talking about bronze, you're talking about legitimacy, though don't think that's necessarily affected, but all the same, you're talking about a significant amount of resources that can really keep you going. Here's the problem, though. The principal issues. What happens when you have such a benefit, but you don't really have an army that's worth a damn? Don't get me wrong, you can still win with it, but Seti's units, and I'm talking here specifically about the units he has access to exclusively to his faction, as opposed to, native units necessarily, or Pharaoh units, his own personal units aren't really that great. While certainly it is a vastly improved situation compared to the one we had at the beginning of Total War Pharaoh, largely because of the addition of lethality, let's consider Seti's units. At tier 2, you get things like Levy Axemen, Levy Clubmen, things like Levy Swordsmen, and Levy Fighters. These units are so worthless that you're actually, in every genuine way, better off recruiting native units. One, because they're flat out better for the kind of battles you're going to encounter. Two, because, well, here's the thing. When you're considering these kind of units, yes, there are some medium units, but there's a lot of things that is very light. And while light units don't suffer quite as much as they did before, it is still better to have a really solid infantry line of at least medium units. Like if you're looking at my army over here, except like some trash, most of the things that I've actually picked up over here, most of the stuff that I've recruited are native units. I haven't bothered with his own unique units. Now, in some cases, native units can work, like you'll think of the Chimerians. Those are native units that they have. They're not faction units, all that sweets with cavalry. But having bad faction units is certainly not great. But even the native units of Lower Egypt aren't especially wonderful either, because, yeah, they're still medium infantry at best, and certainly not the best. Like, it's good enough for the purpose of dealing with Egypt, it's not good enough for the purposes of dealing with everything else in a campaign. So that is one of the problems. You don't have great melee infantry, you don't have great ranged infantry, you don't have great chariots, you don't have cavalry. Tausret wins in terms of that unit roster because she starts with the Upper Egyptian units. And when you're thinking about Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, basically take the map, invert it, and you can understand Upper Egypt is what we'd call to the south. But Tausret just flat out ends up having better units in her faction because, well, she's got either heavier infantry or she's got just better infantry, even if they're lighter units. So things like Upper Egyptian armored, Upper Egyptian archers. Well, just in general, Upper Egyptian units are going to be better than Lower Egyptian units. So that is an enormous downside. Now, another thing that makes a faction, you do certainly have the command that's really good, But here's the problem. Your buildings, they're not great. So you get the recruitment office. Ooh, I can recruit one more extra unit by default. That's great. Actually, the mustering office is the only good building that Seti does have, because it lowers recruitment cost and gives you a recruitment slot with no downside. But then you have Tax Administration Center. Tax Administration Center is not great because, yes, you're going to gain 15% extra resource production. Mind you, there are other ways to increase that in a province. So if you're going to use a building slot, the question is, are you going to want to use this tax administration office that's going to cause rebellions and affect your warforce growth? Or are you going to go over here to the protection buildings that, you know, give you various benefits in terms of certain production, and also things like armor if you're going for the bronze one? Certainly it's multiple buildings as opposed to one, but typically speaking, provinces will be specialized. Like over here, it's bronze production that I'm really interested in increasing, not all resources necessarily. So that building, which you can only build in a provincial capital where you have other option, is not great. And then finally you have Seti's Office of Relations. This is so bad that I can't believe it. Okay, you gain morale to all units. Ooh, great. Morale isn't really a problem in this game, by the way, for your own armies. In point of fact, I would dare say a lot of units have too much morale. And you gain influence. Again, not really an issue, and there are other ways of dealing with influence. Influence is not going to be a problem, especially when you're fighting a freaking campaign in Egypt and you're starting as Egypt. So all of those quote-unquote benefits are meaningless. Like, the structures that he has are meaningless, and pissing off people in terms of relationships is a really, really bad idea. Do you know how you lose a campaign in this game? You end up in wars with everyone. This is what this Office of Relationship will give you with other factions. That it is literally a downgrade and not worth getting. Then you have Set. Set is not necessarily a horrible god to go for, but at the same time, he isn't necessarily really the greatest one. Like, consider what you're getting with shrines. You're getting ammunition and recruitment +2, which not the best benefit considering you're not relying on archers in this campaign. Your archers are whatever. You get, for prayer size and speed, for missile infantry, crucially missile infantry, which, by the way, just doesn't fit very well with Seti, because he is, like, quite a few of his faction units are melee units, bad melee units, and then you get reload speed and range of fatality. Like if we're talking about Amon Mess, yes, but not with Seti. So Set, the actual god you have, doesn't really fit the playstyle you're going for. Someone like Ra can work a lot better. So that's not great either, in a lot of ways. We move on, because oh boy, is there a lot of shit to talk about. Another thing to talk about is the throne of Egypt. Now, technically, you are the next in line. You are the heir of the dynasty, and you're supposed to be the one that takes over when Meneptah dies. Supposed to being the operative word, because you may end up having a civil war on your hands very quickly if Meneptah dies too fast. And even if he dies slowly, which is certainly the case that happened in this campaign, like it took 23 turns. And this is not a customized campaign. I just wish to point this out. This is like default legendary. The only thing that I quote-unquote customized is like features locked on start. I just enabled all the features from the very beginning of a campaign. But outside of that, this is just like pure baseline level of a campaign over here. So considering that situation that we got to deal with over here, the problem is you're not in charge of the dynasty from the very beginning, right? And what ends up happening in this particular case is, one, you don't have a core position that is available from you early on. You could work for it to gain it, but it is a downside. Like, one of the benefits that Amon Mess has is that he starts with a core position. It's not the make or break deal, but the fact that you don't start with the core position and you're going to struggle with the court is not a benefit either. Then, oh boy, let's talk about this. Then you talk about the court. You can use requests as zero regard, but here's the thing. Those requests still cost regard. So even though you can use requests at 0 regard and, get various benefits over here like I have, you're still going to lose regard and you're going to be in a negative level of regard with other people in the court, which it is a bit of a benefit, but also with its own downsides. Okay, so those are some fairly substantial downsides that we do have to talk about that do exist in this campaign, and this is why I would firmly not recommend playing this particular faction, because it's just not going to work very well. Hell, we can even talk about some of the titles he has. Some things are decent enough, like Melee Lethality for his bodyguards and Bloodlust for his bodyguards, sure. Can initiate battles on the march, so I believe that's shared with other ones. You can disable replenishment for enemies, but the only tangible benefit, like reducing morale, okay, all well and good. Rating income, not particularly great. Honestly, just not particularly great. Powerful strike for tier 5 units. Strong vigor for tier 3 and tier 4. Okay, that's decent enough. Lots of downsides. Now, how can you make this work? Keep in mind the issues with the army, the issues with the economy. Believe it or not, there are significant issues with the economy over here, because you start with food, you start with stone, and you can get bronze and gold fairly quickly. So you might think, oh, you have a lot of resources. Not quite, because units that you want to recruit, you do need to recruit a lot of expensive stuff to be able to defeat your initial opponents. So you're going to be at a significant bronze, maybe even gold deficit. You can, if you unlock the features from the beginning, get some elite troops by using your abilities, but still a downside. How do you make it work? Well, this is something that works for all Egyptian factions, so it's not a benefit that I'm going to say, oh, Seti is great because of it. Because again, it's available to everyone, and other factions are just flat out freaking better in terms of doing it. But here's the key. In terms of making this work, if you're intending to play a campaign as Seti. The Ancient Legacy of the Merchant. This is the I win button of this particular campaign, and the reason this is an I win button is because you look at various resources over here. Basically, what you do here is you load up, given your starting position, you load up on food. You can load up on food and wood. There's an infinite supply of them. You do have to spend those resources on a campaign map, but just buy a bunch of food. Like, it's going to be fairly cheap. Like, spend whatever gold, bronze, etc. you have, and then go trade it. And the reason you want to trade it is because you can get a lot of benefits from it. Like, you have the Western Desert and you have Upper Egypt. These both are available in one turn, and you can see that what they're offering in the Western Desert. They want food, and what they're offering is bronze and stone blocks. So you can get stone and bronze throughout the Western Desert at a significantly beneficial rate. And crucially, while you will spend like 3,000 food to get a lot of bronze from that, understand that bronze will trade way above its weight. You can make hold of that food back and then some for it, but you don't actually end up losing food when you're doing this with the caravans, because you then go from the Western Desert into Upper Egypt. And what are they interested in Upper Egypt? Stone. And you get so much stone from the Western Desert that you can trade like the vast majority of it that you get over here in Upper Egypt before you go back home, and still have a huge stockpile of stone. Stone is mainly used for building, so it's not quite as a priority as food, gold, or bronze. Lumber is a bit of a different discussion, but here's the thing. They will give you these golden scarabs, as you can see over there. They'll give you herds of cattle. They'll give you Egyptian ropes and timber, etc. But importantly, those herds of cattle, as well as other things that they have available, will give you tons of resources. Each golden scarab is 300 gold, just to give you an idea. And it's worth like 30 points in a caravan trade. I kind of regret that I started the recording this at this point. Point is, though, with all of this, is that you have the ability of printing freaking money with your caravans, because you go for those favorable trades and you can get those very quickly. Now, again, this is not something that he specifically benefits from necessarily, because it is available in every Egyptian faction. And honestly, I would dare say that Tausret is in a lot of ways better at it, or even or even if we're thinking about like Kush, though it might take some longer distances, you still gain tons of resources and the huge amount of gold that Amon Mess has. Like, consider this, Amon Mess already has an economic powerhouse because he starts with a lot of gold and gets a lot of gold, but you then trade a lot of that gold for everything else you need. You will never face a resource shortage. You will not have to do region trading to survive. It is a brutal start for Seti, but this is the way you make it work. But this is the critical point. Just because you can make it work, it's a game. It's meant to work. Doesn't mean it's good. It's not a great experience. You won't be using too many of the faction units. You'll be using the Pharaoh units, you'll be using Upper Egyptian units, maybe Lower Egyptian units. Some of those Lower Egyptian units are decent, not great, but still, your own unique faction buildings, your own unique mechanics, they're not really worth a damn. So, genuinely don't play this campaign. I suppose it's historically appropriate that Seti is worthless, and it's like the title I got over here is unfortunate because, well, in this particular case, I got this particular title because the world has gone into crisis while I was ruler. Not quite, but we are certainly in crisis right now. It didn't start because of me, and I'll try and put it all back together, but, just gonna take some time, just gonna take some time for me to put the world back together and get civilization back on track. But yes, this is not this is not a recommended campaign at all. Costin signing out.